Venus is sometimes called Earth's twin. It has a similar mass and internal structure to Earth, but in all other regards, they are polar opposites. While Earth is temperate and supports life, the surface of Venus can melt lead. Despite this, many space agencies have sent probes there to study our sister planet. Let's take a look at some of these current probes and some planned for the future. Akatsuki is the only active Venus probe right now. This JAXA mission has an interesting history. Launched in May 2010, Akatsuki was planned for an orbital insertion of Venus in December 2010. Unfortunately, the probe failed its maneuver and ended up in orbit around Sol. However, by December 2015, the probe was brought close enough to Venus that it could attempt another orbital insertion. This one worked. Now, the probe is on an elliptical orbit that brings it 1,000 kilometers away from Venus once every 10 days. Akatsuki is studying the atmosphere of Venus. It is studying circulation, lightning, and the possibility of a jet stream in Venus's atmosphere. It has been discovered that Venus's upper atmosphere actually rotates on its own much faster than the surface of the planet. This probe has led us to a much more complex view of weather on Venus. It isn't just a hellish environment, it's a hellish environment with interesting weather patterns. A future space probe is ISRO's Shukrayan-1. This probe will orbit Venus to study its atmosphere and surface. The interaction of solar wind and Venus's atmosphere will also be studied. There is also a possibility that CNES will collaborate on this mission to get a closer look at Venus. This wouldn't be a lander per se, because landers on Venus end up succumbing to its conditions very quickly. Rather, this addition to the project would have balloons to float in Venus's atmosphere around 30 miles up, a much safer environment. Next is the future Roscosmos probe Venera-D. The full name of this probe is Venera-Dolgozhivushaya, which means long-lasting in Russian. A fitting name for a mission with a lander planned to last 24 hours on the surface of Venus. While 24 hours may not seem long-lasting, compared to all the other Venus landers, it really is. The current record for a Venera probe lasting on the surface of Venus is a little over 2 hours. This probe would be based on the designs of the probes of the Venera program. This was a Russian program to study Venus that went from 1961 to 1984. The purpose of this mission, which will launch sometime in the late 2020s, is to study the rotation of Venus's atmosphere that I mentioned earlier, and get more information on the geology and composition of the surface that previous short-lived missions couldn't crack. After that is Envision by ESA. Envision is one of 3 space probe concepts that are in a bit of a competition. By 2021, ESA will pick one probe to launch in 2032. The other 2 will not be launched in this program, but may be picked up at a later date. The purpose of Envision is to get a very precise look at the geography of Venus. From orbit, the probe will have accuracy down to a very small scale, as well as repeated looks at certain spots to observe weathering of rock over time. Another purpose of this mission is to determine whether or not Venus had an ocean in the past. It is possible that Venus used to be habitable like Earth, but something in its evolution caused a runaway greenhouse effect and turned it into the hellish environment we see today. This would be important to figure out because whatever happened to Venus may end up happening to Earth, and we wouldn't want that to happen. Finally is a possible NASA mission called HAVOC, or High Altitude Venus Operational Concept. This opens up the possibility for manned missions to Venus. The advantages of a manned mission to Venus over Mars is that Venus is a lot closer. A trip to Venus can take anywhere from 3 to 5 months, depending on how much fuel you are willing to spend, while a trip to Mars takes 9 months. As a result, it is much easier to send things to Venus than to Mars. Venus's proximity to Earth also allows for quicker communication, because light has less distance to travel to get between the 2 planets. Finally, Venus has nearly Earth-like gravity, allowing for astronauts to avoid the negative effects of microgravity that they would experience on Mars. But wait a second. How could we send humans to Venus if not even our most durable robots could survive its surface for more than a few hours? The answer is that we will not be going to Venus's surface. Rather, the manned mission would be like a giant blimp floating in the upper atmosphere. Since Venus's atmosphere is mostly carbon dioxide, normal breathing air, nitrogen and oxygen, is buoyant, but helium would work even better anyway. While this mission would just be a temporary one, it would set up the possibility of a permanent cloud city on Venus. All in all, Venus has a very interesting future ahead. With lots of studies of its processes and possibilities of colonization, we can't just write it off as an uninteresting and useless hell world.